As a DJ, there is one artist that these days gets requested more than any other. Bad Bunny? Oh, you got any Bad Bunny? Play Bad Bunny! And look, Bad Bunny is fine. There's just so much other stuff I'm trying to work with. Like, I'm not saying that it has to be all classics or anything.
But
God, Trey.
If I were to tell you that you wouldn't know who Bad Bunny is without Motown, would you believe me?
No, Trey, I would not believe you.
Well, here's the thing. No, Bad Bunny doesn't use the Motown beat, and he's not from Detroit. But when you dig into the story of how one of the most famous record labels to ever exist first started, you realize this is Motown's world, and we're all just living in it.
All right, Trey, you know what? Play through. I'm gonna let you take this. Do your thing.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Wait a minute, does that mean you're gonna...
So check it out. I recently got a chance to play at Berry Gordy's 95th birthday party. Smokey was there. Stevie was there. It was incredible. And this sent me on a big Motown kick. And I've been going in, like real deep. And along the way, I've learned some really incredible nuggets and stories that have both surprised me and enlightened me to not only the history of pop music, but how it directly relates to the music industry that exists today. Later on, I'll also tell you a funny story from Berry Gordy's birthday party. You might be surprised to learn what his favorite song is. Change happens over time, sure. But sometimes there's an exact period of time that you can trace the catalyst of change to. And for just about every song that has ever been heard on the radio over the past 60 years, regardless of genre, it's because of Motown. We're gonna dive into Motown, the songwriters, the musicians, the music factory that they built, and see how they laid the blueprint for the modern music industry. Oh, also, it's just some of the best music ever made. Before I get into the how, we gotta talk about the what. And to do that, we go to the beginning of Motown in 1959. Except, I'm actually gonna stop myself right there because that's not entirely true. The story of Motown actually starts way before that, but for now, let's know that 1959 is the year that the Motown label was incorporated by one of the most legendary record producers and executives of all time, Mr. Berry Gordy. Remember how I just said you can sometimes trace change to a specific moment in time? Well, sometimes you can also trace it to a single person, and Berry Gordy is that guy. Born in Detroit, Michigan in 1929, Berry led a varied life before he ever produced a record. From selling newspapers as a kid to his young career as a professional boxer to serving in the Korean War. Upon returning to the US after the war, he opened a record store that ultimately didn't do very well, causing him to turn to Detroit's booming automobile industry as a factory line worker for the Ford Motor Company's Lincoln Mercury plant. And it was there that the Motown dream was formed. Now, Berry and his sister Gwen were already in the business of making music prior to Motown. He was a songwriter, most notably for legendary artist Jackie Wilson. He and his sister co-wrote Wilson's song Reet Petite, which in 1957 became Berry Gordy's first hit on the charts, and soon followed that up with Jackie Wilson's signature hit, Lonely Teardrops, one of the more important songs in the development of rock and roll. It's because of this early songwriting work that a young 17-year-old Smokey Robinson knew exactly who Berry Gordy was when they first met and started working together. I'm telling you, there's so much incredible history here. Anyway, eager to take control of not just songwriting and producing, but also earning all of the royalties from those songs, 29-year-old Berry Gordy started the Tamla label with a loan of $800 from his family. By the end of 1966, Motown was bringing in over $20 million. In today's money, we're talking about turning $8,700 into over $186 million. Now, how exactly did he manage to do that? Well, let's talk about the Motown machine. Motown's process as a record label was not just in recording and distributing music. It was in the development of stars. And Berry's time on the Ford factory line inspired the structure of how they went about it. I would see the cars start out as a bare metal frame and go around the circle, and different stations would put things on there, and they would go out another door as a brand new car. And I said, my goodness, I can do this with people. I got this idea. One station here, producers over here, arrangers over there, dance instructors over here. They go from room to room and come out a brand new star. The first thing a factory line needs is a building. This takes us to Motown's first headquarters, a house at 2648 West Grand Boulevard in Detroit. I mean, it really was just a house. Berry lived in the apartment upstairs. The garage was converted into the main studio, and the rest of the building was home to the offices and sales department. It was pretty unassuming. Well, apart from the massive Hitsville, USA sign out front. This house, so monumental to Motown, was actually the birthday cake at Berry Gordy's party. And this is one of the first connections of today's modern era of making music. Yes, big iconic recording studios used by major labels still exist, but as music recording technology has gotten cheaper, people nowadays make music in their homes. And I'm not even talking about elaborate home studios. Look at Jacob Collier's Grammy-winning debut album In My Room, recorded entirely in his London home. Or years later, when he goes to Tori Kelly's house to record their rendition of Bridge Over Troubled Water.
It's like, oh, like, oh, but then it cuts short, it goes, oh,
troubled water.
yeah.
This song just won a Grammy this year in 2025, and Tori Kelly's vocals were recorded at her house. Pretty much my entire extended network of peers in Los Angeles are having recording and writing sessions out of their apartments and homes. This is probably what it felt like to show up to Motown Studio A back in the early 1960s. Now you can have a factory, but without factory workers, it's just an empty building. So Berry Gordy got to assembling an incredible team of creatives in this small house in Detroit. First and foremost, Smokey Robinson. You can't tell the story of Motown without Smokey. Not only was he the frontman of The Miracles, one of Motown's first acts, Smokey was a prolific songwriter who had his hand in many of the early hit records for the label, like Mary Wells's My Guy and The Temptations' My Girl. Not only were Smokey and Berry business partners, they were best friends and remain so today. At Berry's birthday, Smokey sat right next to him at the head table. Smokey even wrote a song about what Berry Gordy means to him and the whole world for the Kennedy Center honors. At Berry's birthday, Smokey stood a foot away from him with his hand on his shoulder and sang it directly to him. I mean, these guys have been best friends for decades. It was such an amazing moment. From what I could see, because I was standing there and there was a guy in front of me with the biggest afro I'd ever seen, and at first I was annoyed because he was blocking the view, but then I realized, oh shit, this is Redfoo from LMFAO. And then I remembered, oh God, he's one of Berry Gordy's sons. So I said, okay, I'm gonna just stand here and try to peek around from the side, but I could hear it, I saw parts of it. It was a really cool moment, trust me. Next, songwriters Lamont Dozier and brothers Eddie and Brian Holland. There's also Norman Whitfield. How about Nicholas Ashford and Valerie Simpson? This is just barely scratching the surface of how each of these songwriters joined the label and some of the internal competition that allowed them to all write for the same artists. So you've got great songs and a studio where they're being made. This brings us to the next part of the assembly line. Finding the artists and developing them, otherwise known as A&R. Now Motown didn't invent A&R, but they might have perfected it. William Mickey Stevenson was the chief of A&R for Motown. Now Mickey was in charge of signing artists, listening and processing auditions, and doling out studio time and songs to the artist, as Mickey Stevenson himself explains.
Every artist had to spend some time in the artist development department. At least 2 or 3 hours, at least 3 or 4 days a week. And if you didn't go into the development area and work out, you couldn't record. No artist development, no recording.
In Berry's mind, when one of their acts got on stage, they only had one shot to get it right and impress the audience. So it was crucial that the stage persona and demeanor was top notch. And look, when you watch archival footage of early Motown performances, they are electric. From the Miracles to the Supremes to Gladys Knight and her Pips. And a lot of that has to do with Charlie Atkins. He ran the choreography school of the studio to get each act ready for the stage. This is one of the earliest examples of group choreography, and it still influences the artists of today. Take, for example, the UK band Jungle. You might know their song Back on 74, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of the first times you heard it was because of its music video. Jungle is super well known for their viral music videos, which feature elaborate choreography. And wouldn't you know it, their choreographer Shea Latukolan cites Motown as one of its biggest influences for these pieces. And this is the point of the video where we touch briefly on how Motown approached the racial divide of the late 50s and early 60s. Think of the context of the time. We're not far removed from race records being an actual term used to describe the music black artists made that was aimed mainly at black audiences. R&B was still a blossoming genre with limited crossover to the pop charts, and when it did, it was often through the voices of white artists like Elvis Presley and even the Beatles, who actually recorded 3 different Motown songs on their second album with the Beatles. Because Barry was determined for his artists and music to be heard by all audiences throughout the country, he was dedicated to a refined, classy image. And this ties back into the artists having one shot to make the best impression when they were finally on stages and later TV screens throughout the country. He wanted his Motown artists to be the sound of young America. But it's not just the look of Motown artists that he wanted consistency on. Once artists were done with the A&R development, they hit the studio. Enter the Funk Brothers, the session musicians that played on virtually every Motown record from 1959 to 1972. Now, it's occasionally difficult to pinpoint who exactly is a funk brother, as session credits for Motown weren't always very detailed. There are, however, undeniably a few members. Band leaders Joe Hunter and Earl Van Dyke on piano and organ, Benny Benjamin and Richard Allen on drums, Mike Terry and Paul Reiser on horns, Robert White, Eddie Willis, Joe Messina, Dennis Coffey on guitars, groundbreaking bass player James Jamerson, as well as Bob Babbitt, and some of my percussion heroes Jack Ashford, Eddie Bongo Brown, and Miss Bobby Hall. The Funk Brothers' influence on popular music of the time is almost too great to tell. Their consistency, feel, chemistry, and instrumentation shaped the way all bands approached recordings. You see, everybody wanted the Motown sound. And that exists today. When major artists want that pop sound, what do John Mayer, Harry Styles, Miley Cyrus, and Post Malone all have in common? They call Aaron Sterling on drums, because he's got that sound. That's Motown. I haven't forgotten about Bad Bunny. We're getting there, all right? Stick with me. There was one final step in the assembly line that Berry Gordy took from his time at the Ford Motor Company. Even when the cars were done being made, they had to go through quality control. And that's exactly what Berry implemented at Motown. Every Friday morning at 9 o'clock, all the songwriters and producers, as well as the sales, marketing, and legal employees all sat around a table to present the newly recorded songs. In Berry's own words, these meetings were beautiful and loving, but vicious, literally asking, who thinks this is not a hit? Who thinks this is a hit? This supportive and collaborative, albeit competitive approach to releasing music is something that also still exists today. Think of today's writing camps. When a major label artist is approaching a new album, occasionally there are songwriting retreats where up to 10 or more songwriters are composing and producing demos to hopefully make it to the final cut of the album. Take, for example, Usher's 2004 album Confessions. Usher submitted over 40 songs to his label, but then President L.A. Reid said it was still missing something. Back into the lab Usher went, and eventually came back out with one of the biggest hits of the early 2000s. Here's another example of this collaborative environment. At Motown, you had Marvin Gaye and Smokey Robinson in one room. The Supremes and Holland Dozier Holland were down the hall, while the Funk Brothers were in the studio. This makes me think of the birth of neo-soul in the 90s, where you had the Soulquarians at Electric Lady Studios in New York. D'Angelo and Questlove are in one room, while Bilal and Mos Def are working on another project. Meanwhile, Common, J Dilla, and Erykah Badu are creating magic nearby. Now, those artists spent hours listening to some of their favorite records, trying to figure out what made them great. This included artists like Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder. This is the Motown influence. Major labels can take an artist, hook them up with their marketing team to decide what type of outfit will work for the album cover, while the best choreographers and music video directors are hired, performing songs written from any one of their 100 or so contracted songwriters. This is Motown. For the business side, Berry Gordy hired a man named Barney Alice as head of sales. And again, let's go back. This is America pre-Civil Rights Act. And while Motown was a black-owned business filled with talented black individuals, Berry Gordy wanted his music to cross the racial divide. And he knew that Barney would be key in making this happen. In his own words, Motown was a music company. It wasn't an R&B company, it wasn't a soul company. It was the same as Capitol Records or CBS, a company devoted to making music. Motown historian Adam White says, "There's no question that A-list's race gave him access to and influence with pop radio DJs and programmers. That was the reality of the times." And this is something that Berry Gordy was criticized for, hiring outside of the black community. In Berry's words, "It doesn't matter if you're black or white. I want to win. In some cases, the best person was white. In some cases, the best person was a woman." And this is true too. Some of Motown's top positions were filled by women. Billie Jean Brown was head of quality control. Suzanne DePass was a creative executive. Ramona Singleton was put in charge of publishing. And don't forget the Berry sisters, Gwen, Anna, and Lucy were involved with the company as managers in handling business affairs. This was groundbreaking for the time, and not many other record labels could say the same for themselves. Motown's staff was a kaleidoscope of people, and the results spoke for themselves. Black artists were listened to in some white homes for the first time because of Motown. Black artists were put on national television regularly. The Billboard pop charts were filled with artists of color. Music was being listened to throughout the country by audiences who at the time might have thought they had nothing in common with its singers. Which brings me back to Bad Bunny. I need to get Brandon back here. Let's see if this works.
Oh my God, where was I? Dude, what the? Okay, all right, Trey, you tied Motown directly to the modern music industry, how music is made. You showed the direct influence to all these modern artists. But what about Bad Bunny? That's what this whole thing was for, man.
Okay, so Bad Bunny is a Latino artist singing in Spanish, and he can have a #1 album on the US and global pop charts because music has crossed all divides. In 2020, Bad Bunny's El Último Tour del Mundo became the first all-Spanish album to hit #1. Without Motown, maybe Bad Bunny is still huge, but only in Mexico, Puerto Rico, Colombia, and Argentina. Barriers were broken down by Berry Gordy, Smokey Robinson, the Temptations, and the Supremes, and they stayed down, helping usher in the popularity of Latin music, K-pop, and more.
What was the song that you said was like Berry Gordy's favorite song at his birthday party?
Okay, so we played a lot of Motown music that night, but our DJ Joel had very specific instructions that when Berry Gordy arrived to the party, we had to play his favorite song as soon as he walked through the doors. You probably won't guess what it is.
It better not be Bad Bunny.
Okay, no, it wasn't Bad Bunny, but
Okay.
what it was In the Club by 50 Cent. He danced to this song for like 20 minutes straight. We looped it over and over.
Oh my God.
Don't believe us? Watch this video.
I don't think I'm ever going to hear that song the same again without picturing Berry Gordy dancing to it.
Yeah, pretty much same for me. Look, I've got a lot more to talk about. This is just barely the tip of the Motown iceberg, and I'm the captain of the Titanic. I'm headed straight towards that thing, full steam ahead.
I don't know about this. Does not sound safe, man.
Yeah, it's probably better if you're gone. I haven't even mentioned Michael Jackson, and this is the first time I'm saying the name Diana Ross. We haven't even gotten to the way Stevie Wonder changed the label's history. The stories go on and on. And if you want to hear more, keep watching Digging the Greats.